Welcome, 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 ladies and gentlemen. You know who I am. Today we're going to start on why did Christianity take hold in the ancient world. A little bit of a different format than what you're used to. No, I'm not dancing around. I'm just sitting at the computer. Going to be looking at the same stuff you are. I think this might be more helpful to you because you'll be able to see what it is a little bit easier. You can follow along with me. There's 6 documents plus the background document, which is what you see on the screen right now. The importance here, the thing that we're going to talk about is Christianity in the ancient world. There's obviously Christianity in the modern world. There's different parts and different aspects of it. Very briefly, Christianity is the umbrella name for those people who believe in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. I'm doing this very briefly because I don't want to spend too much time on this as much as on the material in front of us that we have to cover. But in past, Christianity was the dominant religion of Europe. It is has been since Constantine became a Christian and made Christianity the Church of Rome, and that's in about 300 A.D. or BCE. I'm sorry, CE, the Common Era. So I mean, we definitely have something to discuss, and there's a difference when we talk about Christianity. There's a bunch of different schisms and breakups of Christianity that have divided it out to the various versions of Christianity that you see out there today. We have the Eastern Orthodox break, which happened that's called the Great Schism. Then there's the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther and his tapping the 95 Theses on the church door, and that Protestant Reformation created the line of Protestant churches that we have today. That's the Episcopalians, Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterians, and a handful of other, the Calvinists, Lutheran, which these are Protestant churches. Just like it, you have people who are looking at Christianity and they disagree with the way the Roman Catholic Church was doing its instruction, was doing the mass and doing a bunch of other things. There's a lot of finer details which we're not going to get into here, because honestly I could spend a week talking about it and it still would be lots of material to cover. But ultimately, keep in mind that break doesn't mean that there's a fundamental difference between them. They're all pretty much based on the same thing, which is Jesus Christ died and was resurrected, and that he was an individual who lived during Roman times. He was executed by a guy who was the governor of the province, Pontius Pilate, and 3 days after he was crucified, he was resurrected. So that's where Christianity originates from, and we're going to talk about how it went from those 12 apostles and a handful of other followers, who were talking about him, and were they saw him as the Messiah, and that's the basis of Christianity itself. Why did that grow? Why did that grow in a time period when Christians were prosecuted? They were persecuted, I should say, and they were considered criminals in many cases. They were considered criminals because of things that anything bad would happen, you blame it on the Christians. When Rome burned, you blame it on the Christians. When there was a plague, you blame it on the Christians. And so for several hundred years, Christianity grew despite these persecutions and despite the problems that the people of Rome were giving them. What made it stick? Because in that light, it shouldn't have. I mean, that much persecution, you would imagine there's a point where people would have just given up, but they didn't. And we're going to talk about that. We'll start off, though, with getting some background information. Of course, one of the things that I have alluded to in class before, but we are now going to be talking about the three religions. This is only one segment. I'm going to be doing a couple documents tonight. You are going to, of course, have all the documents to do. I'm going to give you 2 weeks to do them, which I think is fair, considering that you'll have time to work on it. We're going to be covering a good bit of it. And of course, we're going to have to answer the question. The essential question is, why did Christianity take hold in the ancient world? So, jumping back to the three major religions of the Western world, what are they? Glad you asked. Okay, so, and yes, you're right. They are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We'll be talking about all three. Obviously, this one's about Christianity, a little bit about Judaism, but they are the three major religions of the Western world. Why? Because they believe in monotheism versus polytheism. As an example, monotheism belief is a belief in one God. Polytheism is a belief in multiple gods. The Greeks and the Romans were polytheistic. They believed in multiple gods, Zeus, Apollo, or Mars, and Ares. These are multiple gods who had different tasks. There wasn't, one God. There was one God for the Christians. That's why they were monotheistic. Just a side note, the Zoroastrians were also monotheistic as well. But once you get to monotheism, that's the only similarity between Zoroastrianism and Christianity. After that, it diverges completely. So we're going to be talking about these three religions. Their basis is this guy named Abraham, which I asked you about on Friday. Is Abraham the center or the origin story for all three religions? And the answer is yes. They all three connect back to Abraham and his wife Sarah. They not to get into the Bible and the biblical part of it too much, just to mention very simple that this was the cornerstone of these three religions. If you understand that they are connected at that base, they separate like branches of a tree, or different ideologies branch off. They're different religions. They branch off for different reasons, and they have different bases. So let's go forward with this. I'm going to read this for you because I think this is a lot of text for you to absorb. So we're now at 7 minutes into this. I'm going to read this and discuss it. So we're starting at the top of the screen. In some ways, we know very little about Jesus of Nazareth. We do know that he lived about 2,000 years ago in what is modern-day Israel. From the Bible, we know the famous story of his birth in the stable, which, by the way, is celebrated as Christmas in the modern world today. But we know almost nothing about his childhood or his life as a young man. In fact, it is not until Jesus is in his late 20s that the Bible picks up his story again. The Eastern Mediterranean region where Jesus grew up was multicultural. Although Israel was ruled by Rome at the time, Greek influence was strong. By the way, Greek influence was strong throughout the entire Mediterranean area. That's not, so it's not just that area. In fact, Egypt was Hellenistic, or what was believed to be, thought of as Greek, especially when they have cities named after Alexander the Great, who was, that's right, Greek. Where was I? Although Israel was ruled by Rome at the time, Greek influence were strong. In fact, along with Aramaic, his native language, it is quite possible that Jesus spoke Greek, and probably Latin as well, because that was the official language of ancient Rome. We know from reading the Old Testament that Jesus lived among Jewish people and followed Jewish law. What made Jesus controversial is his Jewish community was his belief that he was the Messiah. So Jesus was Jewish. That's something to keep in mind as we go forward. The Greek word for Messiah is Christo. It means the Savior, whom Jewish prophets promised would one day bring peace and harmony to the people of Israel. Because he claimed to be the Messiah, Jesus was considered a threat to the old Jewish leadership in Jerusalem. He also made some Romans uncomfortable. They worried that someone who called himself the Son of God could eventually obtain too much power. Local leaders put pressure on Roman officials to have this gentle but outspoken radical killed by nailing him to a cross, a form of execution usually reserved for the worst criminals. Just as a side note, you probably are familiar. We didn't really get a chance to cover this in class. We would have if the COVID hadn't happened. But the Spartacus and all the servile wars of the servants wars against Rome, they were all crucified. It's a famous story about how along the Appian Way back to Rome from the battle site, every certain distance, another one of these former slaves who rose up in revolt were crucified. And the reason why people are crucified is to show, it's a symbol, it's a sign. This is what happens if you break the laws. This is what happens if you upset us. This is what will happen to you. It's a very public display in drawing a line in the sand for people who would break the government's laws. So it's not unusual. It wouldn't be unusual, for them to want to execute someone like who was going to cause possible insurrection in their country. Just to be clear, that's there was no proof that that's what he was going to do. That was just what they thought he was going to do. He hadn't incited any violence. And to be clear, even the document in front of us says that he was gentle, and although he was outspoken. All right, last paragraph on the first column. But the story of Jesus did not end with his crucifixion. In fact, it was just beginning. Followers of Jesus, called apostles, spread his word by practicing love and kindness and helping those in need. Others spread the word through writing. I'm having trouble seeing it. One convert to Jesus' teachings, Paul, traveled the Eastern Mediterranean for some 30 years after Jesus' death and wrote a number of letters that would one day make up about half of the New Testament. 4 other individuals known as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote accounts of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. These accounts, all probably written between 60 and 90 CE, are called the Gospels. Together they make up the first 4 books of the New Testament portion of the Bible. Of course, those of you who are unaware, the Bible is made up of the New Testament and the Old Testament, which is the large part the Jewish Torah, which is a bunch. The Torah is the first half of the Bible. We'll talk about that when we get to Judaism. Let's not get too sidetracked because we're already 13 minutes into this video. So, and again, I apologize. I'm looking at my screen and I can't adjust my screen because if I do, then you won't be able to see it. So I'm trying to whittle down the words. So, first full paragraph, second column. And so the words and stories of Jesus were carried forth. Perhaps surprisingly, many of those who accepted his teachings were Jewish. A number of Jews had fled Roman domination in Israel and lived throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. They spoke and read Greek and were able to understand the story of Jesus when it arrived. Others who were not Jewish heard the story as well and added it to their assortment of gods, myths, and rituals. It was in this rich and varied landscape of cultures and religious practices that the teachings of Jesus took root. Christianity was in some ways a slow-growing movement. The communities of converts that Paul visited were small, their total population as low as 2,000 or 3,000. Still, something was underway. By 100 CE, a number of these Jewish and non-Jewish followers were calling themselves Christians. A new religion was being born. 2 centuries later, in 312 CE, the Roman ruler Constantine converted to Christianity, which I already mentioned to you before. Last paragraph. But our question remains. In a region where many gods and cults competed for a person's attention, what gave the teachings of Jesus staying power? This mini-Q cannot explore all the reasons, but it does present a few. Study the 7 documents that follow and answer the questions. Why did Christianity take hold in the ancient world? First of all, we're going to be covering 6 of those documents. You're going to be writing an essay in the 3rd week of this set of documents. So you're going to have 2 weeks to work on it, on the documents, and you'll be getting videos similar to this. You have 5 questions right now to answer on the side, but I want to make sure you understand that I'm not preaching to you a religion. I'm talking to you about the basis of a religion, which is different. These are not my personal beliefs. These are the teachings of why Christianity took hold. So keep in mind that this Christianity religion, all the religions in the world, especially the major ones, have impacted our society on multiple levels in multiple ways, and good and bad. And so we can, those can be discussed, we can hammer those out, but the reality is you cannot take the growth of humankind without understanding the religious section, the religious piece of our growth. You can't figure out how we went from there to here without understanding the different religions and how they were formed and how they spread and why they took root. There's a lot of compelling reasons that have very little to do with a lot of things, but very very much connected to human emotion and the human centeredness of who you are that allow Christianity to grow. And also, I guess some people could say, but Constantine making it, accepting the church was big and helpful. But 300 years of persecution, like I said before, still allowed the Romans to overcome that. So, how many years ago was Jesus born? Is a question you can answer. That's number 1. Number 2, if asked what religion he was, what would Jesus have likely answered? I already answered that for you. Number 3, what might Jewish elders in Jerusalem have been uncomfortable with Jesus' claim that he was the Son of God? Why would they be upset about that? Number 4, how did Jesus' story and teachings spread across the ancient world after his death? So that's all covered in that what I just read. You should take a good look at the map in the center. You can see Jerusalem, Jericho, and Nazarene right there on the map. No, it's not so great. There is a map later on in the last document of Paul's travels. I'm going to get you a better one for that, so you don't have to focus on that very tiny little one. So it's very difficult to read, and I'll post a better one that will help you out as well. So define the terms. It's Aramaic, Messiah, Apostle, New Testament, Gospels, and converts. So takeaway to this is, why did Christianity take hold in the ancient world? The map that you're going to build now, you can start off with your simple knowledge of where did he come from? Where did Jesus come from? The story is around the story of Jesus and the story of the people around him. It's not just you can have. I don't want this to sound like I'm minimizing the impact of Jesus, but you can have something that's attractive and interesting, but no one may want it. They might be afraid of it. They might not want it. What drew people to want Christianity, to want to be a part of Christianity, to want to believe in a guy who was, lived, died, was crucified on a cross and reborn? Why do people want to believe in that? It's a pretty powerful thing to think about. So that's part 1. You will have part 2 tomorrow, and it's about 20 minutes we're into this now, so I'm going to let this go. Make sure you read. If you haven't done the rest of your work, you're behind. Some of you have not been doing the work that you need to do, and your grades are going to suffer. And it's going to be an unpleasant experience because, you're going to have to pay the piper eventually. Take care of yourselves and make sure you're practicing good social distance. and also make sure you're practicing good hygiene by washing those hands, getting in between your fingers. Please make sure you're careful, and I sure as heck hope that you're uh, helping your parents in this time that we're going through. I'm sure that they're struggling just like you are. And one last comment: Chess Club. Check out Chess Club. Those of you who are in it, we are going to be doing some online chess games. I'm going to organize them. We might even do a tournament. I think we can do an online tournament. So I will talk to you soon. Take care.